In 1940, Romania's strategic position shifted in a sequence of territorial decisions imposed by stronger neighbours. On June 26 to 28, 1940, the Soviet Union issued an ultimatum and then occupied Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, areas Romania had administered since 1918. In August 1940, the Second Vienna Award transferred northern Transylvania from Romania to Hungary, and in September 1940, the Craiova Agreement transferred southern Dobruja to Bulgaria. Within 3 months, Romania lost territory on 3 fronts, while its main security partner in the interwar period, France, had been defeated in June 1940 and could no longer act as a guarantor. These losses frame the calculations of General Ion Antonescu, who took power in September 1940 and became conducator with broad authority. His government treated the Soviet frontier as the immediate military threat and viewed Germany as the only European power able to deter further Soviet pressure. At the same time, Antonescu sought leverage to revise the Vienna settlement and recover northern Transylvania, a goal complicated by the fact that Germany also maintained ties with Hungary. Romania's alignment with Berlin, formalized by joining the Tripartite Pact on 23 November 1940, was therefore both a security choice and a diplomatic wager, the expectation that participation in Germany's war would translate into German support for Romanian territorial claims after victory. For Germany, Romania mattered for 2 reasons that were operational rather than symbolic. First was oil. The Ploesti oil region and associated refineries supplied a large share of Axis fuel needs. Romanian production in the early 1940s ran in the range of several million tons per year, making it one of the few major European sources available to the Reich. Second was geography. Romania provided bases, rail corridors, and a staging area for operations against the Soviet Union's southwestern approaches. German military missions and units entered Romania in autumn 1940, officially to train Romanian forces and to protect oil infrastructure, but also to anchor a dependable rear area for the planned Eastern Campaign. Romanian national objectives were not identical to German objectives, even when they overlapped. Romania's initial operational aim was the recovery of Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, which Antonescu's government defined as national territory. German planning for the Eastern War, by contrast, treated these regions mainly as corridors toward the Dniester, the Bug, and the Black Sea littoral. The gap between recovery and advance became central. The moment Romanian forces crossed the 1940 frontier, Romania's war could shift from a limited campaign for reclamation into an open-ended occupation and a broader fight deeper inside the Soviet Union. On the Soviet side, the 1940 border changes were integrated into a new defensive layout. The annexed territories extended Soviet control westward, while the Soviet command also faced the practical problem of reorganizing forces and fortifications along a frontier that had moved. Soviet political and military leadership assessed Romania not as an independent strategic actor, but as an Axis platform that threatened the approaches to Odessa, the lower Dnieper, and the Crimea. Soviet intelligence and planning therefore treated any Romanian participation as inseparable from German intent. Romania's armed forces entered this alignment with mixed readiness. In manpower, Romania could mobilize a large field army by regional standards, and in June 1941 committed major formations to the coming campaign, organized around the 3rd and 4th Armies under Romanian command, but operationally coordinated with German Army Group South. In equipment, Romanian infantry relied heavily on artillery and small arms inventories built around interwar patterns. Its armoured forces included light tanks such as the R2, a Czech-designed LT Vzamens 35 variant, and French R35s, while anti-tank defences depended in part on 37mm and 47mm class weapons that were effective against some early war armour but faced limits against newer Soviet models. The Air Force combined domestic designs like the IAR-80 with imported German and Italian aircraft, producing a force capable of local support missions but constrained by fuel, spare parts, and pilot training pipelines. Public sentiment in Romania was not uniform, but two pressures were widely felt: the desire to reverse the 1940 territorial losses and the fear that the Soviet Union might press further if Romania remained isolated. For soldiers, the immediate frame was often geographic and personal. Crossing into Bessarabia could be understood as returning to familiar towns and farms, while crossing beyond it would become a different kind of war, shaped by longer supply lines and the realities of occupation. For civilians, especially in border regions and cities linked to oil and rail infrastructure, the prospect of war carried both the promise of territorial reversal and the expectation that Romania would become a target in a larger conflict. By June 1941, Romania's leadership had tied its security and territorial program to German success. The decision did not predetermine the scale of Romania's eventual losses, but it set the conditions under which they became possible: a war launched with limited national aims, embedded inside a coalition whose strategic horizon extended far beyond them, and financed in part by an oil economy that made Romania valuable to Germany and vulnerable to its enemies. On 22 June 1941, Germany and its allies opened the war against the Soviet Union. Romania entered the campaign the same day, presenting its participation as a military effort to recover Bessarabia and northern Bukovina. Antonescu issued orders that framed the operation as the restoration of the 1940 frontier, while simultaneously accepting a coalition command reality in which German operational priorities shaped tempo, axes of advance, and allocation of air and artillery support. Romanian ground forces were organized around two main field armies in the southern sector: the Third Army, under General Petre Dumitrescu, and the Fourth Army, under General Nicolae Ciuperca, operated alongside German 11th Army and other Axis formations in the Army Group's south area. Romanian divisions were predominantly infantry, with cavalry and mountain troops assigned to roles that matched terrain and mobility constraints. German formations provided additional armoured and motorised capacity, while Romanian air units supported reconnaissance and ground attack within limits set by aircraft numbers and maintenance capacity. The first phase for Romanian formations focused on crossing the Prut River and re-entering Bessarabia. The terrain was defined by river lines, rolling agricultural zones, and a small number of major road and rail routes that became immediate logistical priorities. Soviet forces in the sector included elements of the Southern Front and local defensive groupings with artillery and armour support. The Soviet command faced simultaneous pressure along multiple axes, and its early decisions combined local counterattacks with withdrawals intended to preserve forces for later defence lines. Initial engagements were shaped by artillery duels, river crossings, and contested bridgeheads. Romanian infantry, supported by artillery and engineers, pushed against Soviet positions that used natural obstacles and prepared fieldworks. Romanian casualties accumulated in the crossing battles and in attacks against fortified points, while Soviet units also incurred losses and prisoners during withdrawals. Romanian commanders reported both the advantages of operating close to national territory and the operational friction created by mixed Axis command relationships, where Romanian units often depended on German air cover, signals coordination, and fuel allocations. In the northern part of the Romanian sector, the operational aim was to secure Chisinau and the surrounding road network. In the south, the campaign oriented toward the lower Dniester and the approaches to the Black Sea, where the port city of Odessa would soon become a central objective. Romanian forces advanced with the expectation that the campaign would culminate near the pre-1940 border. However, the coalition plan treated the Dniester not as an end point, but as a line to be crossed, with subsequent operations aimed deeper into Soviet territory to neutralize coastal bases and secure the rear of the wider push toward the Dnieper. The transition from recovery to expansion became visible as Romanian formations reached the Dniester in July 1941. German operational planning pressed for continued advance, linking the southern campaign to larger goals: control of the Black Sea littoral, denial of Soviet naval and air bases, and protection of Axis lines of communication. Antonescu accepted these broader tasks, calculating that continued military contribution would strengthen Romanian leverage within the alliance and support longer-term territorial aims, including influence over areas beyond the pre-1940 frontier. This shift created immediate implications for occupation policy and administration. Romanian authorities began planning for governance east of the Dniester, a space that would later be organized as Transnistria under Romanian administration. The rationale combined security arguments with economic considerations: control of agricultural output, transport corridors and urban nodes that could support the war effort. For local civilians, the change in military control meant rapid disruption, requisitions, forced labor demands, and the replacement of Soviet administrative structures with Romanian and German systems, varying by locality and by the presence of security forces. In August 1941, the campaign entered a more demanding phase as attention concentrated on Odessa. The city was defended by Soviet coastal and field forces supported by fortifications and the ability to receive supplies and reinforcements by sea under the protection of the Black Sea Fleet. Romanian Fourth Army was assigned the central role in the siege and assault operations, with German support elements available but limited by priorities elsewhere. The decision to commit Romanian forces heavily against a fortified port reflected coalition needs and Antonescu's willingness to sustain casualties to demonstrate reliability as an ally. As Romanian units approached Odessa's outer defences, the operational environment changed from mobile warfare to positional fighting. Infantry attacks required coordinated artillery preparation, engineer work to breach obstacles, and sustained ammunition supply. Romanian commanders faced the constraint that their army structure had fewer heavy artillery assets than many German formations and limited motor transport relative to the scale of operations. Soviet defenders, operating from prepared positions and urban approaches, could trade space for time, impose losses, and conduct local counterattacks against exposed Romanian infantry concentrations. By late summer 1941, Romania had achieved its initial territorial objective of returning to the 1940 frontier, but its forces were now committed to a broader coalition campaign whose next steps were defined beyond that goal. The opening phase established the pattern that would recur in later years. Romanian decision-making anchored in national territorial aims, executed within German strategic frameworks, and paid for in manpower through extended operations that went beyond the immediate recovery of Bessarabia and northern Bukovina. Romania entered the war with a defined national objective, but without full control over the coalition timetable. Antonescu's minimum aim was the restoration of the June 1940 frontier in Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, presented internally as a limited war of recovery. Germany's planning for the southern theatre set wider endpoints: destruction of Soviet forces west of the Dnieper, capture of key rail and industrial zones in Ukraine, and denial of Black Sea bases that could threaten Axis shipping and flank security. These aims intersected in the first weeks, then diverged as the coalition pushed beyond the Dniester. Operational planning in the Romanian sector reflected this duality. Romanian Third and Fourth Armies were nominally under Romanian command, but their missions were integrated into German operational design through liaison staffs, shared signals procedures, and German control over major air and armoured resources. The immediate Romanian tasks were river crossings, seizure of urban nodes that anchored roads and railways, and protection of the Danube delta and coastal approaches. The German aim in the same space was to keep the southern axis moving fast enough to support the main German thrusts toward the Dnieper crossings, and to secure the rear of the forces aimed at Crimea and the lower Dnieper. Logistics shaped what Romanian planning could realistically support. Romanian divisions relied heavily on horse transport for ammunition, food, and engineer stores, with trucks concentrated in limited motorized elements and at army level. Fuel, spare parts, and modern radios were not distributed evenly across units, which increased dependence on fixed road corridors and predictable supply points. Once the advance moved east of the Dniester, rail became central. Romania and Germany operated on standard gauge, while Soviet rail used a broader gauge, creating a conversion problem that slowed throughput until rails were re-gauged or rolling stock was captured and adapted. This was not an abstract technical issue. Artillery ammunition expenditure in positional fighting could not be sustained without rail delivery close to the front, and Romanian armies had fewer heavy truck columns to compensate. Romanian doctrine and force structure also influenced planning assumptions. Most Romanian divisions were infantry-heavy, designed for methodical advance with artillery preparation, rather than high-tempo mechanized exploitation. Armoured assets were limited in number and mostly light by 1941 standards, making them more suitable for reconnaissance and local support than for breaking fortified lines. This mattered when the campaign shifted to Odessa, a fortified port with coastal defences, fieldworks, and access to sea supply required siege methods, heavy artillery, engineers, coordinated infantry assault tactics, and the ability to rotate units to manage combat fatigue. Romanian Fourth Army was tasked to lead operations there, while German priorities elsewhere constrained the scale of German reinforcement available for a prolonged siege. Soviet strategic goals in the sector were organized around time, space, and preservation of forces. The Soviet command sought to delay the Axis advance long enough to withdraw field formations, re-establish defensive lines on major rivers, and protect key coastal bases. For Odessa specifically, the Soviet objective was to hold the port as a logistical and naval node, while using the Black Sea Fleet to deliver supplies and evacuate personnel when needed. The defense combined field units, coastal artillery, and urban approaches, with command arrangements designed to coordinate land defenses with naval fire support and maritime logistics. Even when Soviet forces withdrew from open terrain, their planning aimed to impose predictable costs through prepared positions, minefields, and counterattacks against bridgeheads and supply routes. A central Romanian political calculation accompanied this military planning: whether Romania would stop at the Dniester or continue as an occupying power. As Romanian administration was extended into Transnistria, military and civilian planning intersected. Security forces, gendarmerie units, and army rear services were assigned occupation tasks alongside combat units, which competed for manpower and transport. Food and livestock requisitions were planned to support the army and to extract resources, while the need to guard rail lines, bridges, and depots grew as the front moved away from Romania's borders. Coalition expectations created misalignment risks on all sides. Romanian leadership assumed that continued contribution would strengthen Romania's bargaining position for future territorial settlements, including the question of northern Transylvania. German leadership assumed Romanian armies could hold extended sectors and sustain offensives, despite structural limits in mobility and heavy firepower. Soviet leadership anticipated Axis expansion beyond Bessarabia and planned defences accordingly, but faced uncertainty about how long Odessa and other coastal points could be supplied under air attack and pressure on land routes. Public messaging followed these strategic choices. In Romania, official language emphasized recovery of lost provinces and the removal of a perceived frontier threat. German propaganda framed the southern campaign as part of a broader ideological and security struggle. Soviet messaging emphasized defense of national territory and mobilization for a long war, integrating local withdrawals into a narrative of preservation and future counteroffensive. By late summer 1941, the strategic planning problem was set. Romania's war aims remained tied to specific territories, while the operational demands placed on Romanian forces were increasingly defined by a campaign whose endpoints lay far beyond them. By early August 1941, Romanian Fourth Army reached the outer approaches to Odessa, a fortified port that the Soviet command treated as both a defensive bastion and a maritime logistics node. The siege opened on August 8, 1941, and lasted until October 16, 1941, with Romanian forces as the main attacker and German 11th Army elements in support. Initial Axis strength is commonly given at about 160,000, with a cumulative total around 340,000 committed over the course of the siege. Soviet defenders are often estimated at about 34,500 initially, rising to roughly 86,000 total through reinforcements and reorganized units. The fighting around Odessa shifted the campaign from maneuver to positional assault. Romanian units advanced through successive defensive belts built around trenches, wire, mines and field fortifications, where progress depended on artillery ammunition supply, engineer work, and repeated infantry attacks to take specific strongpoints and villages on the road and rail approaches. Romanian command had to concentrate forces along narrow corridors where roads could carry guns and supply columns, while Soviet defenders aimed to disrupt those corridors through local counterattacks, artillery fire on assembly areas, and raids against forward batteries and engineer detachments. Soviet operational choices in Odessa were shaped by the sea. While ground forces held the land perimeter, the Black Sea Fleet enabled the defense to receive supplies and move personnel, and it also preserved the option to evacuate if the land situation became untenable. In early October 1941, the Soviet command executed a large-scale evacuation across the Black Sea. Reports commonly describe roughly 121,000 troops and civilians moved out, alongside vehicles and ammunition, with demolition of facilities that could not be removed. Romanian troops entered Odessa on the 16th of October 1941 after the evacuation was completed. Casualty accounting for Odessa illustrates how this early phase generated losses that were not tied to deep advances but to a fixed objective. A widely cited Romanian total is 92,545 overall casualties during the siege, including 17,729 dead, 63,345 wounded, and 11,471 missing, alongside losses in tanks, artillery, and aircraft. Soviet losses are reported with different totals depending on methodology, but a commonly cited aggregate figure is around 60,000 killed, wounded, or missing. At the political administrative level, Odessa also marked the transition from a campaign framed as recovery to an occupation framework east of the Dniester. On 19th August 1941, Germany and Romania signed an agreement placing the territory between the Dniester and the Southern Bug under Romanian administration, later organized as the Transnistria Governorate, with Odessa as its administrative capital. Military rear area requirements expanded accordingly. Guard units, gendarmerie, and transport formations were tasked to secure bridges, rail lines, depots, and prisoner columns while the siege continued. For civilians, the change in control brought immediate security and resource policies. Requisitioning, forced labour demands, and policing measures followed the arrival of occupying authorities, and anti-Jewish actions escalated rapidly after the occupation began. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum summarizes that Romanian authorities murdered tens of thousands of Jews in Odessa and its suburbs in the first weeks of occupation, and then deported the remaining Jewish population, with many killed elsewhere in Romanian-occupied territory in late 1941 and early 1942. In Romanian military terms, Odessa produced a concrete operational result at a defined date, but it also revealed an early pattern. Romania could meet coalition assignments that required sustained infantry effort, yet the cost profile was driven by siege warfare, extended logistics, and occupation tasks that absorbed manpower beyond frontline formations. The Soviet side, while losing the city, preserved a significant portion of its defending force through evacuation, converting a local defeat into a redeployment that would strengthen later defences along the Black Sea axis. After the fall of Odessa in October 1941, Romanian operations expanded into a set of simultaneous commitments that increased manpower demands without producing a single decisive endpoint. One commitment was the Crimean Theatre, where Axis strategy aimed to eliminate Soviet bases that could influence the Black Sea littoral and threaten rear-area communications. Soviet planning treated Crimea and Sevastopol as positions that could delay Axis movement, tie down formations, and preserve forces through maritime resupply, and, when necessary, evacuation. In late December 1941, Soviet forces opened the Kerch-Feodosia landing operation, creating a bridgehead on the Kerch Peninsula intended to relieve pressure on Sevastopol. The campaign that followed lasted from 26 December 1941 to 19th May 1942 and culminated in the German-led offensive, codenamed Trappenjagd, beginning on 8 May 1942. On May 8th, the Soviet Crimean Front fielded about 249,800 to 296,000 men against an Axis grouping built around German 11th Army elements with fewer than 90,000 German troops plus Romanian formations in supporting and holding roles. Romanian units were positioned within this defensive framework on the Parpac Isthmus. In the northern sector of the Axis line, Romanian 7th Corps deployed the 19th Infantry Division and 8th Cavalry Division, while adjacent German corps formed the main breakthrough group. The operational design used concentrated air support, artillery, and armoured elements to rupture the Soviet front and then compress the bridgehead toward Kerch. The results were decisive at the operational level. The Soviet Crimean front collapsed, and Sevastopol was left increasingly isolated. Reported total casualties for the 5-month battle are given as about 38,362 for the Axis, and about 570,601 for Soviet forces, reflecting a combination of combat losses, captures, and losses during the retreat and evacuation attempts. With the Kerch Peninsula cleared, Axis forces concentrated on Sevastopol. The final assault phase opened in June 1942 and relied on heavy artillery, engineer breaching, and systematic reduction of fortified positions. Romanian mountain and infantry formations were integrated into the attacking force. Accounts of the assault commonly list Romanian ex-Mountain Corps elements, including the 1st and 4th Mountain Divisions and the 18th Infantry Division, participating in key attacks during June 1942. The city fell in early July 1942, removing a major Soviet base, but also extending the operational horizon. Success in Crimea did not reduce Romanian commitments overall, because the coalition's main effort was shifting toward the 1942 summer offensive. That shift came with Case Blue, Germany's 1942 plan to advance toward the Volga and the Caucasus. Romania's role expanded from recovery and coastal operations to the protection of long flanks on open terrain, a task shaped by force structure and logistics. Romanian armies were largely infantry-based and relied heavily on horse transport for daily supply, while mechanized mobility and modern anti-tank density were limited relative to the frontage they were assigned. These constraints became more acute as the Axis advance moved hundreds of kilometers beyond Romanian railheads and depots. By autumn 1942, Romanian Third Army under General Petre Dumitrescu was redeployed from the Caucasus area to the Don River sector to cover the northern flank of the German Sixth Army's operations at Stalingrad. Romanian sources describe the Third Army replacing 5 Italian and 2 German divisions and being assigned a front of about 138 kilometers, with divisions holding average sector widths, in the 17 to 22 kilometer range. Soviet bridgeheads remained over the Don at Serafimovich and Kletskaya, and Romanian command repeatedly argued for their elimination as a prerequisite for stable defense. The Romanian Fourth Army, under General Constantin Constantinescu Claps, held the southern flank, where the operational problem was different in detail but similar in structure. A long defensive line across steppe and lake country, thinly held, with limited reserves. Contemporary order of battle summaries for the Stalingrad sector place Romanian Third Army at roughly 171,256 men, with about 140 tanks on the northern flank, and Romanian Fourth Army at about 75,380 men on the southern flank at the start of the Soviet offensive period, reflecting the scale of the Romanian commitment relative to available mobile defense assets. The escalation, therefore, was not only a matter of geography. Romania moved from a war framed around a specific border revision to a multi-front obligation set by coalition requirements: occupation administration west of the Bug, rear area security on expanding lines of communication, and the defense of extended fronts in terrain that reduced the value of static infantry density against armoured penetration. By late 1942, Romanian command faced a practical crisis question inside this expanded role: whether the forces available could both hold the flanks assigned to them and sustain the wider alliance expectations without a major increase in anti-tank strength, reserves, and logistical support. By late summer 1942, Romania's commitment reached its maximum operational exposure on the Eastern Front. Under the broader Axis plan for 1942, German Sixth Army and elements of 4th Panzer Army fought inside Stalingrad, while Allied armies were tasked to hold long flanks along the Don and across the steppe to the south. Romania provided the two main flank formations, Third Army north and west of Stalingrad along the Don Bend, and Fourth Army south of the city in the sector of lakes and open ground. Their mission was not urban combat, but line holding: prevent Soviet forces from striking the German rear and keep the corridor of supply routes open across hundreds of kilometers. The peak problem was structural. The Soviet command prepared a counter-offensive designed to break the Allied flanks rather than the German center in the city. Operation Uranus was scheduled for 19th to 23rd November 1942 and concentrated multiple armies against the Romanian-held sectors, aiming to achieve penetrations deep enough to meet west of Stalingrad and encircle the Axis grouping. Soviet strength for the operation is commonly summarized at about 1.14 million personnel, 894 tanks, and over 13,000 artillery pieces, with reserve forces included. The Romanian component on the Axis side is summarized in the range of roughly 143,000 to 200,000 personnel, with 827 artillery pieces and about 134 tanks. Romanian Third Army, commanded by General Petre Dumitrescu, held the northern flank. A widely cited snapshot places it at 171,256 men and about 140 tanks in the Don-Stalingrad area, deployed across a broad frontage with limited depth and limited mobile reserves. Soviet planning exploited known bridgeheads over the Don near Serafimovich and Kletskaya as launch points. Romanian commanders repeatedly identified these bridgeheads as operational risks because they allowed Soviet armor and artillery to be brought forward under cover of prepared positions. At 8:50 on 19 November, Soviet forces opened the northern assault with heavy artillery preparation and attacks led by 21st Army and 65th Army, supported by 5th Tank Army. The initial infantry waves encountered minefields and defensive fire, but the Romanian defense lacked the density of heavy anti-tank guns needed to absorb repeated armored thrusts once Soviet tank and mechanized corps were committed. In the same period, German command decisions mattered. 6th Army headquarters did not immediately redirect the 16th and 24th Panzer Divisions, then engaged in Stalingrad, to reinforce the Romanian sector. Counteraction fell largely to formations described as understrength, including German 48th Panzer Corps, which had fewer than 100 serviceable modern tanks and fuel constraints. Romanian 1st Armoured Division, attached in this area, fought Soviet armour while suffering communications and coordination problems typical of the mixed command environment. On November 20th, the southern pincer struck the Romanian 4th Army sector. Romanian 4th Army, commanded by General Constantin Constantinescu Claps, is commonly listed at 75,380 men in the Stalingrad area. Soviet forces assigned to the southern attack included armies oriented to break through and then drive northwest toward the Don crossings, creating the second arm of the encirclement. The Romanian southern positions were thinly held across open ground, and the defence depended on field artillery, limited armour support, and the assumption that German mobile reserves would be available for rapid counterattack. By 22nd November, Soviet spearheads linked up west of Stalingrad, completing the encirclement of the main Axis grouping in the area, including the German 6th Army and major parts of the Romanian flank forces. The operational result was achieved through depth and speed. Rather than attempting to defeat every defending unit in place, Soviet formations bypassed pockets, severed road junctions, and targeted crossings and supply nodes that made coordinated withdrawal difficult. Romanian formations that attempted organised retreat often did so under air and artillery pressure, while units that lost communications were more likely to fragment into smaller groups moving toward the west. Romanian losses in this peak phase are recorded as a large proportion of the forces committed. One commonly cited Romanian total is 158,854 casualties, dead, wounded, and missing between 19 November 1942 and 7 January 1943, with major equipment losses, including around 100 tanks in the same period. The outcome meant that most of the Romanian divisions engaged in the Stalingrad flank mission ceased to function as full-strength formations, and surviving personnel and remaining equipment had to be consolidated as the front stabilized farther west. The destruction of the Romanian flanks at Stalingrad forced an immediate shift from offensive contribution to institutional survival. In the weeks after the encirclement, Romanian command focused on extracting remnants, reassembling units, and restoring basic cohesion. Romanian accounts of the withdrawal describe ad hoc marching groups and survivor columns moving west under German operational control in parts of the retreat. On January 7, 1943, the 3rd and 4th Armies together could muster about 73,062 men, a fraction of their pre-Uranus strength, while 2 Romanian divisions remained trapped inside the Stalingrad pocket. Reconstitution required choices about where Romania would spend its remaining capacity. Rebuilding frontline divisions, expanding air and anti-aircraft defences around oil infrastructure, and improving anti-tank density that had proven insufficient on the Donofon. Romanian industry and Army technical services pursued several adaptation paths. One was new artillery. The 75mm Reșița Model 1943 was designed by combining features from multiple existing systems and entered production late in the war. Surviving production summaries describe at least 372 pieces built, and other compiled tables list around 375 by December 1944 against an order of 1,100. Another was improvisation with captured equipment. Romania converted 34 captured T-60 light tanks into Takam T-60 tank destroyers by the end of 1943, creating dedicated companies that could be assigned where Soviet armour was expected. A parallel program converted the R2 Panzer 35T chassis into the Takam R2 using captured Soviet 76.2mm guns, testing the concept in 1943 and producing a limited number thereafter. A third adaptation path was external supply. To reinforce Romanian armoured capability without waiting for domestic production, Germany delivered 100 Stu-G3 AWSF G assault guns to Romania in autumn 1943, entered in Romanian inventories under local designations. These vehicles were intended to provide a more survivable direct-fire anti-tank and assault capability than the light tank fleet that had dominated Romanian armour in 1941–42. Operationally, Romania also had to keep forces in the field while rebuilding. Romanian troops remained deployed in 1943 in the Cuban bridgehead, a fortified Axis lodgement on the Tarman Peninsula that served as a staging area and a shield for the Kerch Strait crossing routes. Romanian operational summaries describe a Romanian presence in the Kuban in 1943, totaling about 64,606 troops, holding sectors within a wider Axis defence, exposed to repeated Soviet pressure and amphibious raids. This meant that even after Stalingrad, Romania could not fully withdraw to rebuild. It had to rebuild while continuing to man perimeter fronts and rear area security lines. At the same time, the war reached Romania more directly through the air campaign against oil. On August 1, 1943, the USAAF attacked 9 refinery targets around Ploiești in Operation Tidal Wave with 177 B-24s, 162 over the target, facing heavy anti-aircraft fire and Axis fighters. US losses are commonly summarized as 53 B-24s destroyed and 55 damaged, with 310 aircrew killed or missing and 190 captured or interned. After the raid, Romanian authorities expanded passive defence and repair organisation, while air defences were strengthened. From April to 19th August 1944, the 15th Air Force struck Ploiești repeatedly, turning oil defence into a continuous operational requirement that competed with the Eastern Front for guns, fighters and trained personnel. These military adaptations ran alongside political adaptation. After the Soviet victory at Stalingrad, Romanian leadership and opposition circles increasingly treated the German alliance as a bargaining constraint rather than a stable strategy. Contemporary scholarship describing Romanian decision-making notes that Antonescu began to consider an understanding with the Allies as the military situation deteriorated, while Vice Premier Mihai Antonescu pursued contacts in neutral countries, and the opposition also explored channels. By 1943–44, Romania was attempting to rebuild combat power, defend oil and rail infrastructure, and hold an extended front, while simultaneously testing diplomatic exits, whose feasibility depended on Soviet and Western decisions as much as on Romanian intent. In early 1944, the Eastern Front reached Romania's borderland in a form different from 1941–42. Sustained Soviet operational pressure, combined with an air campaign aimed at oil and transport nodes that Romania and Germany depended on to keep armies in the field. The Axis defensive system in northeastern Romania and southern Ukraine was organized under Army Group South Ukraine, built around German 6th Army and 8th Army, with Romanian 3rd and 4th Armies holding extended sectors and rear communications. One contemporary summary places Army Group South Ukraine at about 905,000 Axis troops with limited armoured strength relative to its frontage, a structure that relied on intact rail lines, functioning airfields, and predictable fuel deliveries. Soviet planning treated this sector as a gateway. The operational aim was not only to retake Bessarabia, but to destroy the Axis grouping in the region and open routes into Romania and the Balkans. On 20th August 1944, the Red Army launched the Second Jassy-Kishinev offensive with a two-front attack, Rodion Malinovsky's 2nd Ukrainian Front and Fyodor Tolbukin's 3rd Ukrainian Front. A widely cited force estimate for the Soviet side is 1,314,200 men, supported by 1,874 tanks and assault guns, reflecting preparation for deep exploitation rather than a limited border battle. The operational design targeted the Romanian armies as the accessible hinge of the defense system. Malinovski struck the 4th Romanian army sector between Târgu Frumos and Iași, aiming to rupture the line and then drive mobile forces into the rear. Tolbuchin attacked out of bridgeheads over the Dniester against the 3rd Romanian Army, turning the southern and eastern flanks simultaneously. In the first days, Soviet artillery and armour penetrated prepared positions, then bypassed pockets to seize road junctions and crossings that controlled withdrawal routes. Within this framework, the German 6th Army, positioned behind and between Allied sectors, became vulnerable to encirclement once Romanian-held flanks lost cohesion. By 23 August, the Soviet converging advances had surrounded major parts of the German 6th Army, while Romanian formations were being overrun, fragmented, or surrounded in place. Reports commonly note that German air support in the sector was sharply reduced at the critical moment after months of Allied strikes against airfields and oil infrastructure that constrained Luftwaffe operations and fuel availability. The result was a rapid transition from a contested defensive battle to an operational collapse, where staffs could not reliably shift reserves, restore communications, or open corridors for organized withdrawal. The military break produced a political turning point in Bucharest. On 23 August 1944, King Michael removed and arrested Ion Antonescu and announced a change of course, ordering Romanian forces to cease hostilities against the Soviet Union and to resist German attempts to reverse the decision. Britannica describes the coup as Michael's arrest of Antonescu on the 23rd of August, ending the military dictatorship that had aligned Romania with Germany. For Romanian decision-makers, the immediate calculation was that continued alignment with Germany now risked occupation and dismemberment without any realistic path to restoring the strategic position lost since 1942. For Germany, the defection threatened the rear of Army Group South Ukraine and the security of routes linked to Ploiești and the lower Danube, prompting attempts to hold key points and re-establish control by force. Fighting followed inside Romania between German units and Romanian forces implementing the new orders, including combat around Bucharest as the situation at the front disintegrated. The Soviet advance continued through Moldavia toward the capital. A commonly cited date for the Soviet entry into Bucharest is 31 August 1944, after which Romania's status shifted from co-belligerent to a country under active Soviet military presence while formal terms were negotiated. On 12 September 1944, Romania signed an armistice in Moscow with the Allied powers, published the next day, which formalized the end of Romania's Axis alignment and placed Romania under an Allied Control Commission in which Soviet authority was predominant. Operationally, this meant Romania's war changed direction in weeks, from holding the German alliance line in Moldavia to fighting German formations still in-country and then contributing to later operations against Germany and Hungary. Strategically, the August 1944 turning point converted Romania's earlier territorial and alliance gamble into an emergency reorientation under battlefield pressure, with immediate consequences measured in the destruction of field armies at the front and the loss of political freedom of action at home. The days after 23 August 1944 were defined by overlapping withdrawals and rapid reclassification of forces. Romanian frontline formations that had been engaged against the Red Army faced three immediate constraints at once: broken communications after the Jassy-Kishinev collapse, the need to disengage from German command structures, and the practical requirement to avoid being treated as hostile by Soviet units still advancing west. In several sectors, Romanian units ceased fire, attempted to pull back toward assembly areas, and then were disarmed or screened by Soviet formations. until higher-level arrangements clarified who would be reorganized and who would be sent to camps as prisoners. This produced a patchwork outcome. Some Romanian troops were regrouped and re-equipped under new orders, while others were immobilized during the transition. Inside Romania, the military problem shifted to control of key nodes rather than continuous front lines. German forces in the country sought to preserve routes out of Romania and to secure transport corridors that connected to Hungary and the Balkans. Romanian forces, now acting under the Royal Proclamation and later under armistice obligations, moved to block German withdrawals and to protect government centres, rail junctions, and oil region infrastructure. The resulting engagements were not a single campaign, but a series of fights around airfields, bridges, and depots, where the outcome depended on who controlled road access and who could bring artillery and armour into urban approaches. Bucharest became one focal point because it combined political authority with transport infrastructure. Romanian units loyal to the new government moved to isolate German garrisons, seize communication sites, and hold approaches to the city, while German units attempted to regain initiative by air attacks and local ground thrusts. The fighting was shaped by limited time windows. German forces needed freedom of movement to withdraw, while Romanian forces needed to prevent the establishment of a stable German perimeter that could threaten the capital or enable a counter-coup. Once Soviet forces entered the capital area at the end of August, the tactical balance shifted toward Romanian control of the city, but Romania's freedom of action narrowed at the strategic level because Soviet presence determined how the transition would be enforced. In the oil region, the immediate aim was preservation and denial at the same time. German planners had long treated Ploiești as critical to sustaining their war economy, while Allied air forces had already been striking refineries and rail yards in 1944. After the Romanian switch, German units and demolition teams attempted to remove stocks and disable facilities that could not be held, while Romanian authorities sought to keep the installations functioning to avoid economic collapse and to meet new supply and reparations obligations. Even where major facilities were not fully destroyed, rail spurs, storage, and power distribution suffered damage, reducing output and complicating repair at the moment when fuel shortages were already limiting mobility for all armies in the region. The armistice signed on September 12, 1944, formalized the new military direction and created an administrative framework for enforcement. Romania accepted an Allied control commission with Soviet predominance, committed to expel German forces, and agreed to place Romanian troops at the disposal of Soviet operational needs for continued fighting against Germany and Hungary. The agreement also imposed reparations payable primarily in goods, and it tied the status of northern Transylvania to continued Romanian participation in operations on the new front. For Romanian commanders, this meant rebuilding operational capability under external supervision, while continuing to field formations in active combat. German withdrawal and Romanian reorientation converged in Transylvania and the Carpathian approaches. Romanian units that had been depleted in 1944 were reorganized and then redeployed westward, often with Soviet-provided planning direction and logistical priority set by Soviet headquarters. German and Hungarian forces aimed to hold mountain passes, delay crossings, and keep open withdrawal corridors toward the Hungarian plain. Romanian and Soviet forces aimed to secure rail and road access and to prevent the establishment of a stable defensive line on Romanian territory. This fighting generated immediate civilian displacement, especially along major routes out of Moldavia and Transylvania, and it disrupted harvest and transport cycles that had already been strained by requisitions and air attacks. The humanitarian aftermath was visible in three categories that did not move at the same speed as armies. First were prisoners and internees. The transition produced large numbers of detained personnel, including Axis troops captured during the offensive, and Romanian soldiers detained during the confusion of the switch. Second were refugees and evacuees. Urban populations moved away from contested junctions, while rural areas near rail lines faced repeated requisition by successive forces. Third was infrastructure loss. Bridges, signalling equipment, locomotives, and rolling stock were damaged or seized, reducing the ability of the state to distribute food and fuel in the months when front lines were still moving. By late 1944, Romania had exited the Axis coalition in legal and operational terms, but it had not regained full control over its military and economic decisions. Combat continued on new axes while internal administration adapted to occupation-like conditions under an external control commission. The immediate outcome was therefore not a clean withdrawal from war, but a reconfigured participation. The end of one set of alliances, the continuation of fighting under a different command framework, and a domestic landscape shaped by prisoners, shortages, damaged transport systems, and a political centre operating under the presence of a major Allied army. Romania's participation from June 1941 to August 1944 ended with outcomes that diverged sharply from the aims stated at the start. The initial objective of restoring the 1940 frontier in Bessarabia and northern Bukovina was achieved in summer 1941, but did not remain durable. By 1944, the Red Army reoccupied those territories, and the post-war settlement left them outside Romania. The second objective, administering and extracting value from territory east of the Dniester in Transnistria, was temporary and collapsed with the 1944 front-line break. The third objective, recovering northern Transylvania lost in 1940, was not secured through the German alliance. It was regained only after the August 1944 switch and subsequent operations against German and Hungarian forces, and it was confirmed in the post-war peace settlement. The human balance sheet became the most visible strategic metric. Romanian losses across the Eastern Campaign are often summarized on the order of 500,000 killed, wounded or missing between 1941 and 1944, with the largest single concentration of destruction tied to the 1942 encirclement at Stalingrad and the 1944 collapse in Moldavia. The distribution of these losses also mattered. Infantry divisions holding wide fronts bore a disproportionate share, while shortages in mobile reserves and anti-tank density made losses sensitive to Soviet breakthrough methods. For Germany, Romanian manpower reduced the need to allocate additional German divisions to rear area and flank missions, but it also introduced coalition dependence. Once Romanian armies were broken, German operational systems in the south lost their hinge formations. For the Soviet Union, Romanian participation meant an additional Axis army group to defeat and occupy, but it also provided an opportunity. Soviet planners repeatedly targeted Allied sectors where force structure and frontage created exploitable weak points for deep encirclement operations. The economic dimension of the gamble centered on oil and transport. Romania's oil production and refining capacity made it strategically valuable to Germany and a priority target for Allied air operations. Once sustained bombing campaigns and the 1944 political switch removed Romania as a reliable supplier, Germany's fuel crisis intensified, while Romania faced its own shortages and repair burdens. Railways, bridges, rolling stock, and port facilities became long-term limiting factors after repeated wartime damage and rapid front movements, constraining post-war recovery and increasing dependence on external control over logistics and energy. The political legacy was defined by sovereignty and alignment. The alliance with Germany initially promised security against the Soviet Union and leverage in territorial disputes, but by 1944, Romania's choices were narrowed by battlefield realities. The 23rd of August 1944 coup ended Antonescu's rule and changed Romania's operational alignment, but it did not restore full freedom of action. The armistice framework placed Romanian administration under an Allied control commission dominated by the Soviet Union. And in the following years, Romania shifted into a Soviet-aligned political system. By 1947, the monarchy was abolished and a communist regime consolidated power. meaning that the state that entered the war in 1941 did not survive in its pre-war political form. Civilian experience shaped memory as much as frontline operations. Romanian occupation policies in Transnistria and cities such as Odessa involved mass deportations, forced labor, and large-scale killing of Jews and Roma under Romanian authority, alongside broader requisitioning and security measures affecting the non-Jewish population as well. Soviet civilians in the path of Romanian and German advances experienced destruction, displacement, and coercive occupation systems. Romanian civilians later experienced bombing, shortages, conscription, and the consequences of frontline reversal. After 1944, additional civilian burdens came from rapid political change, economic disruption, and the presence of a large foreign army during the transition. Historiographical debate has remained structured around the same core question posed in wartime, but answered differently by different participants. Whether Romania's leadership pursued a limited war for border revision or accepted an expansive coalition war that exceeded national capacity. One interpretation emphasizes threat perception in 1940 to 41. Soviet pressure, the collapse of Western guarantees, and the belief that only Germany could offer immediate deterrence. Another emphasizes agency, that continuing beyond the Dniester, administering Transnistria, and committing major armies to distant theatres converted a recoverable border dispute into an open-ended commitment whose costs rose faster than any plausible gains. A third focuses on coalition mechanics, that Romania's oil and geographic position made participation difficult to avoid once aligned, while coalition command relationships limited Romania's ability to set endpoints or refuse missions. Measured against stated aims, Romania recovered one major territory in the long term, northern Transylvania, but did not retain the eastern territories that justified entry into the war in 1941. Measured against coalition expectations, Romania provided large formations for 3 years, then reversed alignment when defeat in the south became imminent. The lasting significance lies in how these outcomes redefined Romania's strategic position. The war began as an effort to reverse the 1940 losses and manage a perceived existential threat. And it ended with a transformed state, altered borders, extensive casualties, and a post-war alignment determined less by Romanian bargaining than by the military balance created on the Eastern Front.